34, the $4 Amish trick that removes chlorine from any tap water. The bottled water industry is panicking. The glass sits under the tap, and the water smells faintly like a public pool. You notice it before you even taste it. It's late, kitchen quiet, just the hum of pipes in the wall. And that smell rises again, clean but not natural. There's a small moment here most people ignore. You pause before drinking. Like your body remembers something your mind forgot. Some folks say there's a $4 trick for this. A simple homestead habit. Charcoal, cloth, and time. Nothing more. And the strange part isn't what it costs. It's why anyone ever stopped doing it in the first place. Because once you know what it does to tap water, you start asking different questions. Not loud ones, quiet ones. The kind that stick with you. And one of those questions has been sitting under your sink this whole time. If you've ever noticed tap water tasting different than it used to, like it changed somewhere along the way, you're not alone in that. I'm curious what it's like where you are. Do you drink straight from the tap, or has it become something you avoid? People who notice these small changes in daily life tend to see the bigger picture a little differently. Stick around if that's you. Mini objective. Build sensory discomfort and emotional recognition around modern tap water while planting the first curiosity loop about a forgotten $4 homestead. Method. The water runs steady, clear, and too sharp in the air. You can hear it hitting the glass before you even look at it. There's a smell there most people stop noticing after a while. But once you notice it again, it stays with you. It's not dirty. That's the strange part. It's the opposite. Too clean in a way that feels slightly wrong. Like something was taken out that you didn't agree to lose. You drink it anyway sometimes, just out of habit. There's a glass like this in almost every kitchen I've ever sat in. Sitting beside it, usually, is something older, a jar, a pitcher, something that doesn't try to impress you, just sits there quietly, waiting the way older things tend to do. I remember a neighbor once saying something simple at his table. He said water didn't used to need explaining. You turned a handle, and you trusted what came out. Now, trust feels negotiated. That's where the first question usually starts. Not with anger, just curiosity. A small shift in attention. Why does something so basic feel different now than it did years ago? And what changed while nobody was looking? Some say it's chlorine, some say it's pipes, some say it's nothing at all. But none of that fully explains why the taste feels like a system. Not a person, not a place, a system. Something built to serve millions of hands at once. And here's where an old idea comes back around. A small, quiet method that never made it into modern instruction books, often spoken of in homestead kitchens, sometimes linked to Amish practice. A simple idea, about $4 worth of ordinary things. Charcoal, cloth, time. That's how it's usually described. Not a miracle, not a cure. Just a habit people kept. For water that felt too sharp, too processed, too loud on the tongue. And once you hear that, you can't unhear it. Because the real question isn't whether it exists. It's why something that's simple would ever need to be rediscovered at all. And that question doesn't stay quiet for long. It starts following you into the next glass you pour. Mini objective. Deepen the sense of system water, explain chlorine in grounded terms, and introduce older household water habits that didn't rely on machines or money. There's a memory most people don't realize they still carry. The taste of water from somewhere else. A different house. A different time. You drink enough glasses, you start noticing the pattern. Some water feels soft on the tongue, some feels sharp, and the sharp ones all seem to come from the same kind of place. Modern systems were built for safety first. That part is real. Large towns, long pipes, water moving farther than it ever used to. Something had to be added to keep it steady along the way. Chlorine is part of that story. Not as a villain, just a tool. A way to make sure what arrives at your tap is safe enough for millions. No mystery there. No hidden hand. Just scale doing what scale requires. But safety and comfort are not the same thing. And that gap is where most of this conversation actually lives. What keeps you safe might still taste like something you never asked for. That tension sits quietly in the background of everyday life. I remember an older man once describing well water like it had personality. Cold in the morning. Softer after rain, a little earth in it sometimes. He wasn't romantic about it, just observant, like he expected water to change. Then came a different habit, a slower one, almost forgotten now. People would fill a jar and leave it sitting overnight, nothing added, just time doing what machines used to do in other ways, settling, breathing, quiet work you can't see happening. Some homes still do this without thinking about it, a pitcher on the counter, not for show. just for drinking later. The water inside doesn't change dramatically, but it changes enough that people notice even if they can't explain why. There's a reason these habits survived in small corners of rural life. They didn't require permission or parts or instructions from anyone, just attention, just patience, just a kitchen that wasn't in a hurry. That kind of thing tends to disappear quietly in modern living, and yet none of this really answers the sharper question underneath it all. Because settling water overnight is one thing, waiting is simple, but there's another method people talk about in lower voices. One that doesn't just wait for change, it actively nudges it. Charcoal shows up again here, not in a laboratory sense, in a household sense. Wrapped in cloth, dropped into a jar, water poured slowly through it, not rushed, not forced, just guided like the old ways tend to be. And people who've tried it describe something subtle afterward. Less edge, less smell, a kind of softness that wasn't there before, not transformed, not new, just easier to drink, and that difference is small enough to ignore until you stop ignoring it. That's usually when questions get louder again, because if something this simple can shift the taste even slightly, then what else has been sitting in plain sight all this time, unnoticed? And more importantly, why did people stop talking about it at all? That's where the next part starts to matter. Mini objective. Reveal the traditional charcoal-based method in a grounded, cautious way while keeping curiosity alive and building toward emotional payoff. There's a point in every conversation like this where the table gets quiet, not because something dramatic was said, but because something simple finally gets named out loud. Charcoal, cloth, a jar, and time. That's the way old homestead notes often describe it. Not as a system, more like a habit that never needed a name until it started disappearing. I've heard it described different ways over the years. Some say Amish homes kept versions of it nearby. Others say it was just rural common sense before store shelves took over. Nothing official. Nothing branded, just practice. You take a small piece of clean charcoal, the kind used for heat, not chemicals. You wrap it in a thin cloth, something plain, cotton usually. Then you let water pass through it slowly into a jar or pitcher. No force, no pressure. Just gravity doing quiet work, and afterward you don't rush to judge it, you let it sit a moment. People who use it talk less about removal and more about softening. The sharp edge on the smell doesn't hit quite the same way. The taste feels less like metal in the background, more neutral. Now here's the part I always think matters more than the method itself. Nobody is saying this replaces proper filtration systems. Nobody serious should. Water safety is still a real concern in many places. And this doesn't fix everything that modern systems are built to handle. That honesty matters, because without it, the whole thing becomes noise. And what's left isn't a miracle, it's just a tool, a small one. But small tools used consistently have a way of changing habits. A jar on the counter becomes normal again. A slow pour becomes a kind of pause in the day. And that pause is something most modern homes quietly lost. There's another detail worth mentioning here. Some people use this kind of setup only for taste, not safety, just for drinking water at the table. Nothing more complicated than that. And that's where the real curiosity starts to shift. Because if something this simple can make a noticeable difference in comfort, why did it ever get pushed so far into the background of everyday life? Not by accident, not by conspiracy, but by replacement. By systems that work faster, scale wider, and leave less room for waiting. Bottles, filters, delivery, convenience layered on top of convenience. Each one solving a problem the old habits didn't try to rush. There's even a kind of irony in it. The more advanced the system became, the less people thought about the water itself. It just arrived. It just worked. That was enough. But for some people, that enough never really settled. They still notice the smell, still notice the edge, still find themselves looking at a glass and pausing for half a second longer than they used to. And that pause, that's where this whole idea keeps surviving. Because once you notice something in your everyday water, you can't fully unnotice it. You start paying attention in small ways, not out of fear, out of awareness. And awareness always leads somewhere, sometimes toward change, sometimes toward simplicity, but always forward. And what comes next isn't really about charcoal at all. It's about why simple habits like this didn't disappear because they stopped working, but because something louder replaced the silence they used to live in. Mini objective. Land emotional closure by reframing loss of simple water habits as replacement, not failure. Restore agency. And end with belonging plus reflection. There's a pattern you start to notice the longer you live. Things rarely disappear because they break. They disappear because something faster takes their place. That's how most quiet traditions fade out. Not with argument, not with proof. Just replacement, one small convenience at a time. Water is a good example of that because nothing about it looks complicated on the surface. You turn a tap, you buy a bottle, you move on with your day. But behind that simplicity sits a long chain of systems. Pipes that stretch farther than anyone ever sees, plants that treat water for millions at once, and industries built around the idea that you don't need to think about it. And to be fair, most of the time you don't. That's the part that makes the whole thing stable. It works well enough that attention is no longer required. But old habits lived in the space where attention still mattered. A jar on a counter, a slow pour in the evening, a piece of charcoal wrapped in cloth, sitting quietly like it belonged there. None of it was dramatic. That's important. It didn't announce itself. It didn't promise transformation. It just existed as part of daily rhythm. And somewhere along the way, that kind of rhythm became rare. Not because people forgot how to do it, but because they stopped needing to, or at least stopped being told they did. The bottled water world didn't need to fight those habits directly. It just offered something easier to carry. Cleaner packaging, faster access, less thought, and when life gets busy enough, less thought always wins. Still, some people notice something strange after a while. Even with all the convenience, they still pause at certain glasses of water, still compare taste without meaning to, still remember how water used to feel different in someone else's kitchen. That memory doesn't really go away. It just sits under the surface, quiet as dust on a shelf, and every now and then it shows up again, not as nostalgia, as recognition, because the truth is simple enough that it almost gets missed. Our grandparents didn't need perfect water. They needed understandable water. Water you could observe, water you could wait for, water that changed slowly enough for you to notice it changing. That kind of relationship is hard to rebuild once it's gone, but not impossible to notice again. Sometimes it starts with something small. A glass that tastes a little too sharp, a moment of hesitation at the sink, a question you don't say out loud. And from there, everything becomes a little more visible, not in a fearful way, in a steady way. The kind of steady awareness that used to live in kitchens and porches, where people didn't rush to label things. They just paid attention. If you've been watching this and thinking about your own home water, then you already understand the point without needing it explained further. It's not about going backward, and it's not about rejecting everything modern. It's about noticing what was simple before it became invisible. Because once you notice it, you get a choice again. And choices, even small ones, are where a little bit of control comes back into your hands. I'd be curious what your own experience has been, what you drink now, what changed over the years without anyone really announcing it. And if there's still a place in your day for simple things done slowly, you'll probably recognize what comes next. Because the next story isn't about water treatment at all. It's about the kind of spring people used to trust after storms, when everything else went quiet and the only thing left was what came straight from the ground.